Most people that join this type of meeting, three hidden clarity gaps that create 90% of problems, normally work in places where that they're generally people that are in a leadership type role and they're supervisory. And there's usually type situations where they feel that there could be more clarity and more things that could be going right. Statistics show that 80% of organizations are dysfunctional, have chaos, have things going on it that is not ideal. And even in most organizations, big organizations that are doing very well, continuously work on trying to make things clear and improve. My goal today is to go through three things that create clarity gaps in organizations. I call it organizational drag, fog, and it makes it very exhausting and difficult for the people that are supposed to be leading because it's extremely frustrating. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about myself. I have a degree as a CPA, but I spent 20 years in education and dealing with organizational health and leadership. I was the chief administrative officer, and I had to deal with managing people, managing teams. I was always very passionate about organizational health and leadership, making sure that everyone who worked there was having an amazing experience, that they were getting as much out of it, and I could give them as much and give them as much clarity as I possibly can. Sometimes in your role, you're somewhat limited, but you can influence many people when you're in those type of roles. Right now, I work with organizations, leaders, CEOs, and teams to help them build a better sense of leadership together. So I want to check in to see where everyone here is up to. So what I'm asking everyone, if you could think of one word which describes your organization, if you want to put it in the chat here and like what how your organization is. I've heard many different things. Sometimes it's amazing, sometimes it's chaotic, sometimes it's dysfunctional, sometimes it's confusing. I like that. And that's so true. Most organizations have disorganization. I've worked with many people and dealt with it myself for many years. I'm going to try to give three principles today that would be helpful to trying to improve that. Okay. So today I'm going to go through the three clarity gaps that I want to discuss, how to spot them, how these gaps create significant problems, and one tool for each one to start to close those gaps. One thing which I've heard, so many people have told me that when you discuss their organization, they said, "Oh, we're all busy." So when I translate busy means disorganized, that I'm always running, I'm always making myself crazy to fill in all the gaps because I don't know who's supposed to be doing those things. We're going to touch on a few of those points. One of the things I like doing is working with leaders to make their life less chaotic. So let's start with the first one. I want to ask everyone here a question and think about the answer. If I would go over there and interview them and ask, is there anyone on your team, if they're not sure if they're responsible on a certain topic, is it something that they think they're responsible for? Or maybe the other person's responsible for it. They themselves aren't even sure if that's part of their job. And even worse, as the manager, are you sure who's supposed to be responsible? The rule I have is that if two people own something, no one owns it. Let's give a scenario of what that means. Let's say it's 5 o'clock on a Friday, putting aside Shabbos. It's the weekend, and let's, for example, you're in a case in a school, you have a big parent issue that comes up. Or if you're in a business and there's a major client that's really upset about something, they need an answer right away. Who's responsible for that? Is it the administrator, the principal, the admissions department? Which principal is it? Is it the head of school? Who is it? Or if you're in a company, is it the customer service? Who's the person that's going to be responsible for it? So there's really two different options that could happen. One of them I call the collision, and one of them I call the gap. And they're both a problem. You have people that are very motivated. They're like, oh, there's a problem here. I need to take care of that. So then you have four different people or departments that start trying to deal with this issue. But what you end up happening is that, and that sounds wonderful, but what's really happening is you have everyone did 4 times the amount of work. You're paying 4 people to do one job, and they may all have different answers. So that's what's going to happen in that situation. Next time that problem happens, no one's going to do it because they're like, this time there was a problem. We all jumped in and we all did it. But what really happening is that you just taught everyone that, I shouldn't do it because someone else is going to do it. So this is going to create, which we'll see when we get to the third issue. And then the other one is you have a gap. Is that everyone says, that's not my job. It's not part of my job description. I'm not supposed to do that. The manager is supposed to do that. The other department is supposed to do that. And then you're going to have a problem with whatever that situation is. You have an upset parent. They're going to start talking to everybody about their problems. You have a client. Now they're not going to be happy with the product that you're selling. So either way, you're going to have a big problem. Therefore, what do you do about this? This is called the stop line. You have to have a handoff point, meaning you have to clarify where every role stops and another one begins. This is the job of this, whoever is the supervisor, whoever is the manager. They're the one that has to figure these things out. Obviously, there are going to be things that no one thought of, and you're going to have to figure that out. That should happen once. The general principle is that it's the responsibility of the supervisor, whoever's in charge, to make sure that anyone who works for them has clarity of what their role is. An example I gave was you have a product, someone in charge of the products and someone in charge of engineering. So where exactly does that switch over? A real life example I dealt with is I was managing an admissions department. We were working on getting the whole admissions department to figure out how to get interviews, how to bring people in. And we were doing a great job. We were bringing all these people in. And then we passed it on to the division saying, okay, this student was accepted. It took us like a month and a half to realize that when we passed that on, they weren't doing anything with that information. But if you really want to think through everything beforehand and try to realize that, now I wouldn't make that mistake because I understand that you have to think through all the steps and not just assume that, oh, that other department, I wasn't in charge of those departments. So even you have to, as a manager, you may have to work with a different supervisor and say, okay, this is the process. It gets handed off to your division or your department. Where does that handoff happen? I ended up making that. They didn't have the resources. We made that part of the admissions department. But then we created a system where everyone was working very closely together. This is one of the challenges that we deal with. By not having that, you're going to create bystanders, or if you as a supervisor are the one that keeps jumping in and keeps dealing with it, then you become the hero. Become the hero, you're just going to get burnt out and go crazy. And then you have talented people. Those talented people could do so much more, and you're not making use of that. Yeah, so you're asking us really good questions. I'm happy to talk about that at the end. Okay, so now let's say you did that. Let's say you got through everything and you have clear roles and responsibilities. And if you read the book I wrote, The Creator Blueprint, it's really an acronym. There's clarity and roles. Those are the first two, the C and the R, creator. Those are the fundamental pieces of things that are necessary. What's the most frustrating part of meetings that you have? Some people say there's a book called Death by Meeting. And it's so true because for so many people, meetings are awful. Meetings are miserable. But really, meetings are the most important thing that any business or organization can have if they're done right. Meetings generally are not the problem. The problem is clarity. The reason your meetings feel frustrating is because most communication problems are actually clarity problems. Your problems with the meetings aren't the meetings, it's whoever's in charge of the meeting, it's not having the right clarity. For example, if 2 people are arguing over a decision, it's usually not because they're bad in communicating, it's because no one clarified who has the authority to make the final decision and who's the one that's supposed to be bringing up the problems. This is such an important topic. There needs to be clarity. At the beginning of the meeting, it has to be clear what decision is being made. What exactly are you trying to solve? Everyone has to have clarity at the beginning. It depends on the circumstances and the organization. But sometimes we used to have a list of different topics to bring up so people could understand beforehand. But then it has to be a very clear question. because it's meetings aren't just for schmoozing. Meetings are to actually make real decisions. You can't just put budget. What exactly do we need to decide on the budget? You have to have clarity on what you're deciding on. When you're at a meeting, who's the one making decisions and who is authorized to make a decision? Most people don't even know how decisions get made. At the end of the meeting, it has to be very clear who has the authority, how do the decisions get made. It has to be very clear. We decided to do this. Everyone should be able to repeat exactly what the decision was. Sometimes the decision is that we're not making a decision, and that's fine, but you have to know the next steps. What do we need in order to make a decision? There's a whole system in the infrastructure. There's 4 different types of meetings, what you're supposed to do at each meeting. Some are strategic, some are operational. To have a good meeting, the meeting has to have this system. You have to define the decision, the person who's deciding, the method, and the next steps. That's really how it works with meetings and decisions. Even if you have the right people and you're really making the right decisions, it's that's why we want to talk about how these rules live. Every school and organization has a culture. If you aren't intentional about your culture, it's just going to happen by accident. You have to be very intentional. So, what are the different types of things that I'm referring to when we talk about culture? Most people will choose safety over truth. What you want in an organization is your employees to tell you what they think. Most of the time, the people further down the line know more about the details than the people on top. Most schools, I think the head of school knows everything. They know everything. The teachers know a lot more that's happening on the ground than the head of school does. But that information needs to get back, or else they're just going to make decisions in a bubble. But people are afraid to speak. They don't like, I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to have to do more work. That they never listen to me anyways. You want people to be thanked for bringing information up. You need everyone to have psychological safety. Second thing is that you want people to never assume the status quo. Oh, this is the way we've been doing it for the last 20 years, the last 3 years, the last 10 years. You want people always to feel that maybe this isn't the right way. This is a big reason people have consultants come in because that's really, it is a very hard thing to do. And what you really want is outside people to come in, ask lots of questions. Why are you doing it this way? And usually the answer is, I don't know, that's just the way we do it. And you really have to start from scratch. In addition, we call it activity over results. People just like being busy. It feels good to do all those things. But really, the best supervisors aren't so busy. They're working on strategic things, they're working with their teams, they're trying to figure out how their teams could do things more efficient and be available to answer those things. You, if you're too busy, then you don't have the time to be focusing on all the different people down the line. And there's so much more that they can get done. The point here is that if you don't build culture intentionally, the old culture is what's going to really come in. And I wanted to, for all the people that came, the 30 people that signed up, I have a survey which I'll send out in the email, in the first email reminder. There's a survey that goes through 10 different subtopics. It gets you to think where your organization is up to on those topics. And we find that most organizations where there's challenges on those topics, that's really something to possibly work through. Once you take that, you get a score and it's all on this PDF. I'm happy to sit down with you personally and go through your score. So let's just go on to the finishing with the culture thing. The 4 signs of an accidental culture. One of them is artificial harmony. Everyone seems happy, but really what's happening is everyone is just sitting there being quiet. The best meetings are where people are screaming at each other in a very nice way. That's how you're going to get the best answer. The second point is post meeting. You're going to have a meeting, everyone's just saying yes. You need a culture where people are willing to listen. And if not, whoever's in charge is doing a bad job. If you have certain employees that aren't holding their weight, it's a double whammy. You're paying these people to do not much, and the other people get frustrated because they're taking all the slack of the work for everyone else. If the supervisors allow that, that makes those people say, I don't want to work here. I'm going to leave and go somewhere else. The other point we were discussing is that when you train people that everyone's in charge, people will be like, I'm going to let someone else do it. Why should I do that? I'm not going to take the initiative. I was just speaking to somebody. They're not sure. Are they in charge of the curriculum or someone else? Even if I think I'm supposed to be in charge of the curriculum, I'm not going to make myself crazy because you're making decisions without me. So people that should be involved in the decision, if you're not bringing them in, they'll be like, why should I bother? You didn't bring me into the meeting. You made a decision without me. So then they're not going to do that. And then you'd have all your people that are good aren't going to do so much anymore. And that's very frustrating for everybody. Culture forms by default. Old habits dominate when rules and communication are clear. Leaders shape the culture. The leaders are the ones. It's the job of all the leaders to shape the culture through consistent clarity and follow through on all these different topics. Over here, what we were discussing is a little tip of the iceberg on some of these concepts. These concepts are all very deep, and there's many different parts of it. When you take that survey, you'll see all the different parts that are potentially applicable and how your organization could possibly gain by more consciously working through everyone. If you want that session, I'll send this out in the email. If you have questions, I'm happy to talk out loud with you here.